Good morning. My name is Dustin DeLima, and this is my first time doing a recording like this, so please bear with me. Anyway, today I'll be talking about the pirates of Somalia. And the first thing you need to know about this, I guess, to talk about the pirates of Somalia, it would be proper to at least begin with the setting where this all takes place. So this takes place in the Federal Republic of Somalia, and it's known in this peninsula that is often called the Horn of Africa. It is also regarded as having the longest coastline in mainland Africa, and the country is divided into roughly 18 regions. It is semi-arid, which is, as we've learned, it's a balance between monsoon seasons and very dry seasons. So they're very dependent on the time of year to allow any sort of agriculture or anything along those lines. And with a population of around 10 million people, that's a pretty big deal. And most of this population is Somalian, and most of them is also Muslim, and we'll get into that later. Also, something to keep in mind is that this little area here, known as the Gulf of Aden, is where many of the piracies take place, and we'll go into that later. So, I guess to get a brief understanding of Somalia, we're going to go through a very, very condensed history of what this place has gone through over the centuries. And I guess unlike a lot of places that we hear about in Africa, Somalia has had a very rich history, and even since the classical period has had known interactions with places like Egypt, Rome, and all these other places because of its area as a coastal city in such close proximity to all these other areas. In the medieval period, Islam came in, and things, I guess, just worked quite well. It was a good place for Islam to just come in and settle, and over those years, it built up a very strong Muslim community, which we see to this very day. But in the scramble for Africa, Britain turned its sights towards Somalia, and it basically became a battle of the British versus the Sultans, which in turn became Muslims versus Christians. And it is regarded as perhaps one of the most effective anti-colonial wars that have ever occurred in history. But eventually the the Muslim sultans were defeated in 1920 when the British resorted to actually aerially bombing them just to take over Somalia. In World War II, the Italian fascists came in and took certain segments of this place, and eventually Britain, in conjunction with Somalia, launched this war to reclaim this place from fascist Italy. After the war, Britain reclaimed control, but it still gave Italy a few tiny pieces, I guess, just to hang on to. And when Cold War came along, like so many other places in Africa, this Somalia was treated as a proxy state between the United States of America and the Soviet Union. In June 26, 1960, Somalia gained independence, but 9 years later there was a military coup which resulted in the assassination of the current leader, and the Somali army came into power under a man named Mohammed Siad Barre. And in 1991, the military government was overthrown, which in turn plunged the country into civil war. So as you can see, this place has gone through a lot of conflict over the recent years. Hell, even historically. But now let's move on to the Somalian Civil War. You'd think that in a place where everyone is pretty much unified by economic hardship and more or less a unified religion, there'd be a means of people getting along, but there are a lot of clan divisions, and as we saw before, with the country divided into roughly 18 different regions, there's a lot of room for differences between these different people. And during Barr's reign, he exploited a lot of these different clan divisions, just as we saw with the British colonizers, where they had the habit of turning different tribes and families against one another for their own personal gain. So on top of this, you have the clan divisions, and then you have a power struggle between all the warlords that want to come into power. And the basic result is anarchy, and there's a fear of whoever really comes into power is going to be corrupt anyway. So the people who really lose are the ones at the bottom. And often, because of this, Somalia has become described as the ultimate example of a failed state. And another thing we should talk about before we actually get to the piracy is that one of the big reasons that this is actually occurring in Somalia is because of overfishing. And I know it may not sound like something that really fits in, but when you consider that a lot of these Somalian pirates are actually ex-fishermen, it'll all start to sink in soon enough. And this overfishing in Somalian waters has been caused by the lack of infrastructure and stability in the Somalian government. And with basically no one to enforce the rules, there are no rules. So that means all these other vessels from South Korea, Japan, Spain, they all come in and basically with their huge trawlers just take loads and loads of fish. And the Somalian fishermen really can't do anything about it. On top of taking all the fish out, these people sometimes come in and use it as a waste dump for toxic chemicals and their nuclear refuse. And with all of this going on, it becomes obvious that really the traditional way of life for these Somalian fishermen is no longer possible. As one quote says in a video that I watched, our jobs, our profession as fishermen, was stolen from us by these foreign ships. We tried to save our livelihood. We used to put our nets out there to capture fish and lobsters, but all that's finished now. They brought ships that dragged all the fish up. They came by the coast at night and we could hear them working. They stole everything from us, even the stones on the seabed. So this in turn led to a rise of piracy. But piracy has also really kind of been around for a very long time. As we previously stated, Somalia was a very popular place for trade due to its effective placement as a peninsula. So piracy has been around since the Hellenistic period, when you have people raiding these traders coming from faraway areas. And the Gulf of Aden, as we discussed earlier, as that place between Yemen and Somalia, is really just too damn big to be regulated by any particular navy. And contemporary piracy, which is what we're seeing now in Somalia, began in the 1990s. And it really began as a means for these local fishermen to basically defend what was theirs, the Somalian waters, from illegal fishing and the toxic dumping that's become so prevalent. And again, due to the lack of political stability in Somalia, no one can really enforce this. So it's anarchy on the land and in the sea. And another reason for this piracy, which we'll discuss later as being money, is a quote that says, "In a country where the GDP is approximately 600 US dollars, multi-million-dollar ransom payments are extremely lucrative and provide a bright alternative to what would otherwise be an economically frustrating future." So let's go on to the actual Somali pirates. And as I previously stated, they're poor coastline fishermen, and like most of Somalia, they're of Islamic faith. And despite this, people who talk about them like to emphasize on this to prove that like their raiding of these European vessels isn't some sort of religious terrorism that is often associated with the Muslim culture. The main motivation, as previously stated, is money. And a lot of these pirates do not view themselves as pirates. They don't refer to themselves as sea bandits, as it's called in their language, but as a patrol organization, basically a militia, based to defend what's the homeland. And they also target ships that bring in contraband to the country because they realize how messed up Somalia is, and they don't want it to get worse. They just want to really bring in wealth to make life better for them, their families, and their communities. And another big quote to basically summarize the situation that these people are in is a Q&A session with a pirate that was holding a big freighter hostage, and the ransom money, $20 million in cash, would be divided between all the men and used to fend off hunger, as hunger was their real enemy. As for the cargo and the hostages, Ali stated that they had no intention of selling weapons to anyone in Somalia, as the country had undergone enough chaos and devastation due to the years of rampant fighting in the past 18 years. They also had no intent of killing hostages and believed they could all interact honorably, because they are all human beings capable of treating one another with respect. And that's basically it. Thank you for the presentation. The class. Thank you for listening to my presentation. And have a wonderful day.